everyone for coming. Is this anyone's first time here? I know I met a couple people. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. If you're not familiar with Cape Fear River Watch, we have lots of literature, lots of educational materials up at the front. Feel free to browse through those while you're here. This is our monthly seminar series. Like Kemp said, we do this once a month at the first Saturday of the month, and we have a really recurring theme with our Saturdays. So we also have our second Saturday cleanups and our third Saturday paddles. So we have a lot of Saturday activities for y'all to get involved with, regardless of what your interests are and regardless of how you like to help the Cape Fear River. Just some housekeeping things. You're probably wondering what the heck this is. This is a very beautiful kayak that we are going to be raffling for our summer membership raffle, and that's why it's right in your face, so you can't forget it. So feel free to come look at it before you leave. Kemp's favorite feature is that it has the detachable cooler. I think that's also a good feature. But we'll be raffling this off, so keep an eye out on our social media for that. Basically, if you renew or start a membership during that time frame, you are entered to the raffle to potentially get this kayak. Another thing, we have a really cool opportunity up at the front. You might see a photo book as you're leaving today. A local photographer named Steve Brem is actually generously giving away those books for free with a donation to Cape Fear River Watch. If you scan that QR code that's on the book, it'll take you to the website. You have to do it through that designated website just so we have all of it in one little place. But it's a free book. It's very pretty. It has lots of images of the Cape Fear River. So feel free to take a look at that. Without further ado, I think that's all from me. It's nice to meet everybody. I'm going to pass it over to Allison Polinski, our speaker.
Hi, everybody. My name's Allison. I'm a coastal scientist at Bald Head Island Conservancy, and thank you all for coming out today. I'm really excited to talk to you about Barrier Island freshwater ecology. So I'm curious, by show of hands, who has been out to Bald Head Island? Okay, so a good portion of the crowd here. So I work at the Bald Head Island Conservancy, and we're a nonprofit, probably best known for our sea turtle protection program, but we also have a great education program offering a lot of nature-based tours and field trips, as well as our conservation department, which is where I work. So I do a lot of environmental monitoring, water quality sampling, wildlife surveys, including deer surveys, alligator surveys, shorebird surveys, and a lot of field work. So today we're going to be talking about freshwater habitats on Bald Head Island, and then we're going to get into some of the wildlife that I survey. So we're going to kind of start at the bottom of the food web and move our way up. We're going to do macroinvertebrates, and then frogs and toads, and then end with alligators. So to position ourselves here, let's see, I have my clicker. We're up here in Wilmington, and then all the way down where the Cape Fear meets the Atlantic is where you will find Bald Head Island. So here's a closer look at Bald Head Island. This is what we call the Smith Island Complex. We have Bald Head Island here, the big one in the middle, Salt Marsh, Tidal Creek, then we have Middle Island, more Salt Marsh and Tidal Creek, and Bluff Island. And a fun fact is that Bald Head Island isn't actually an island. You can walk all the way up on the sand and get to Fort Fisher. But this whole area is the Smith Island Complex, and in Bald Head you might notice it's a bit of a different shape than what you might think of a typical barrier island. When you're thinking like Topsail, Wrightsville, Masonboro, they're usually very long, skinny, maybe the ends get a little bigger, but Bald Head is pretty wide all around, and we have our beautiful maritime forest to thank for that. And we have the Bald Head Woods Coastal Reserve on Bald Head Island, and this is 191 acres of maritime forest, which is a globally imperiled ecosystem. This is extremely valuable to have on an island. It stabilizes the whole island and protects from storms. It's characterized by beautiful old live oak trees. This one is estimated at least 300 years old right here. And one thing about having a beautiful old forest on an island is that these trees rely on fresh groundwater. And this is where it comes into freshwater cycles on barrier islands. So this is a great illustration of a generalized cross-section of a southeastern United States barrier island. So pretending this is Bald Head Island, we have the freshwater aquifer below the island. An important term is the freshwater lens. and that is the fresh water that sits on top of the more dense salt water. And another important term is the water table, and that's the line at which below it the ground is saturated with water. So in a barrier island made from old dunes, we have a natural progression of vegetation types from things like sea oats and more grassy dune plants up into this maritime forest community characterized by a lot of oaks, red cedars, and bigger trees. But we still have these old dune ridges. So in places where a dune ridge gets really shallow, it might be below the water table. And with rainfall recharging the aquifers, seeping through the sandy soils, this can cause that freshwater lens to swell a bit, creating natural freshwater wetlands on barrier islands. These are known as interdune swales. Another term might be ephemeral pond, you might have heard. These are ponds that come and go with the seasons, with the rainfall. And these are natural areas. This is a picture I just took a couple days ago when we had that big storm. This is kind of a good look at the different vegetation communities. You can see those taller trees around. You can tell there's a bit of lower elevation. You can see some cattails. And you might not know that it's full of some water just by looking at it, but this image right here is what you see when you're looking down, and this was actually calf-high water. And the sound of the frogs was deafening. There were insects everywhere. It was full of life. The birds were loving it. And these interdune swales are really important breeding grounds for amphibians. So every month I do aquifer depth to water monitoring, and I do regular aquifer water quality monitoring. So we have wells throughout the swales, and they're always full of frogs. And frogs prefer to breed in these areas because it's a safe place to lay their eggs. There's no permanent fish communities because it is so seasonal. So their eggs have a safe place to turn into tadpoles and froglets and have their life cycle. So this is the exact same place. Here's a bush, and this is the same bush here for reference. These are taken in 2 different seasons because in here the dog fennel's blooming, but you can see right here and right here is the difference between only 1 hour of rainfall. And even when it's dried up, usually sometimes it dries up in the summer, it still is pretty moist ground, a little muddy, and a lot of tree frogs still like to go there because they just need a little bit of moisture. And there are these really beautiful pockets all throughout the southern dune ridges of that maritime forest preserve. These are incredibly dynamic ecosystems too. This is that same place again. Here's that bush for reference. And this is a month or so after Hurricane Florence. And this became more of a established pond for a while after that. You can see it even grew some duckweed. This is a different swale, but similar story after Florence. So these swales really change a lot depending on environmental conditions. And that is natural for them and the animals and plants that live there. However, they are faced with some threats due to intensifying storms due to climate change can bring extra salt spray in or saltwater intrusion from the ground. And saltwater intrusion is a threat to these ecosystems just because we have the frogs, we have the vegetation that relies on fresh water. So any sort of changes to the environment as well as pollution and runoff can negatively impact these ecosystems. So we also do have some man-made freshwater sources on Bald Head Island. This is a map of the ponds. If you've been to Bald Head Island, you know the western part is a pretty large golf course. So these ponds were created starting in 1972, and they do create some habitat for our alligators, especially here. But I want to point out that I've heard sometimes on the island that, you know, the alligators came here after the ponds, or this fresh water was created. But I looked through some old reports, some old surveys of the flora and fauna, one from 1970 and one from 1946. This drawing is from 1970, and there's a pond drawn here and a pond drawn here, and beautiful descriptions of deep open water ponds surrounded by acres of natural freshwater marsh. And these are what these areas look like today. There still is a natural freshwater wetland on Bluff Island, which Bluff Island is that third one that I mentioned in the Smith Island complex, and it is a private property, so I don't get to go there too often to sample or anything, but did get to take a hike out there. And then over here, this is kind of one of those low-lying areas. It's built up now with houses. That's kind of where the Bald Head Island Club is. But after storms, this area floods, like one of the worst flooding spots on the island. And you can still see these natural areas with a lot of cattails, reeds, some lower-lying ground. And these reports also, in 1946, there were alligators reported. Both times they found 6 species of frogs, which require fresh water, as well as mud turtles, and a whole variety of ducks and migratory birds, all enjoying these natural freshwater wetlands on the island. So with that, I want to get into some of the freshwater wildlife that I survey on Bald Head Island. So we're going to start with freshwater macroinvertebrates. To break it down, these are animals without a backbone. You can see them with the naked eye. You don't need any sort of magnification. And they live in ponds, streams, or creeks. So that includes a whole lot of insects. So many flies, dragonflies, certain beetles. A lot of different insects have part of their life cycle, their nymph or larval stages, that are fully aquatic. So this is really interesting because these are species that you don't really think too much of. You see them flying around, but they are proven to be wonderful indicators of water quality depending on the taxa. So this scale here, green, we have these taxa are sensitive to pollution. This means that they need a clean water body to survive, reproduce, and thrive. So if you are sampling and you find caddisflies, mayflies, and stoneflies especially, that means that is a healthy water system that is indicating good water quality. On the other end here, which some of these you can kind of just imagine, such as leeches, flatworms, maggots, black fly larvae, these don't have a whole lot of requirements to fulfill their life cycles. They can thrive in areas maybe with some poor dissolved oxygen or some algae overgrowth. So these are ones that can be found pretty much anywhere. So surveys for presence, abundance, and diversity can be used, and this is a really common method used throughout the country. In North Carolina, the Department of Environmental Quality has established benthic monitoring data, and this is a really common method for flowing water systems, especially streams and creeks. So in this map here, blue and green dots are indicating a good rating on their scale, so they're probably finding some stoneflies, caddisflies, mayflies, as well as some good water quality readings, whereas the red is indicating poor or severe quality. And so they're probably having some low dissolved oxygen, maybe some other water quality issues. They're probably not finding any of those good indicator species, probably just a lot of maybe flatworms, maybe some snails, things like that. So I'm really interested in this, and I wanted to bring this sampling to Bald Head Island. So I wanted to establish a baseline of what we have here, just because these are man-made ponds comparing to the North Carolina data of natural flowing water systems. So first, just do some sampling, see what we have here, and understand this golf course ecosystem health, where I know on golf courses there's a lot of input, pesticides, fertilizers, so just understanding the overall health of that, where we have so many alligators, turtles, other animals living in these ponds. So this kicked off with some of my interns in the fall. They sampled 12 sites, as well as did some vegetation surveys, sediment analysis, and water quality measurements to correlate that to see how that related to macroinvertebrate diversity. And then this summer, just recently, I sampled 12 more sites. And I based mine off of the shoreline vegetation type, because macroinvertebrates, a lot of times when you find them in the water, they're clinging to different roots or grasses, like whatever is kind of those emergent vegetation in the water. So I had 3 sites at bare shoreline, usually just grass, Then I had the medium category, a lot of different sedges and rushes. Tall vegetation was the next one. This is usually overhead, some reeds like Phragmites or cattails. And then the last category was when the maritime forest went all the way up to the bank, and the roots and branches were in the water and providing a lot of structure for critters to live on. And arriving to the site, we did some YSI measurements to get the dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, salinity, among other readings. And then sampling is with a dip net. It's pretty easy. You have to hit the ground and any branches to dislodge any creatures, and then did 4 1-meter sweeps at each site. And then, of course, the identification. I don't have any results, but I wanted to show you some of the creatures that I found this last sampling, because I found them from all across the spectrum. So we have right here, I think it's really cute, it's a casemaker caddisfly. You can see its little head poking out right there, and a mayfly as well. And these are taxa that are really great to see. They're indicating that the habitat quality is good. Kind of middle of the pack, we have, this is a dragonfly larva. And we have some fork-tailed damselfly larva as well. And a whole variety of different species of water scavenger beetles, as well as other beetles. And then the more tolerant of pollution species, we have some amphipods, flatworms. These are a couple different kinds of fly larvae, and then some snails. So this is some data from the fall to just kind of show how this is used in looking at water quality. So we have 2 different sites here. We have number 17, which I'm calling that because it's near hole 17 on the golf course. And then we have the ibis pond, which is called so because ibis used to roost there. And even just visually, you can look and see that the ibis pond is covered in duckweed. There's some visual differences here. So upon sampling, the species abundance, which is how many individuals were found at each site, was very different. Number 17 had 72 individual animals found, where the ibis pond had 1,005. So thinking about that, you're like, that sounds pretty good. You're finding a lot of animals, but this is where that scale comes into play. And we can look at the species richness, which is how many unique species. So number 17 had 12 species for those 72, where the ibis pond only had 3 species for 1,005 individuals, and over 1,000 of those were one species, which was this guy, amphipod or scud. And if you remember from the scale, this guy is over here. They can live in environments that are a little bit compromised. So the water quality readings, this place has low dissolved oxygen. The water's pretty shallow, warm, it's covered in duckweed. Not much is really liking to live here, except thousands of these guys. Whereas at hole number 17, 2 of the 12 species were that caddisfly and that mayfly. So this is kind of showing how this kind of sampling can be applied. And it's also a great way to engage with people and explore the world around you. We had Young Scientists Academy from Wilmington come out for a field trip. We took them sampling, and also when we're in the field, a lot of kids come up because we have these nets and they're curious what we're finding. And it's really interesting to just sweep a net by something that you don't see any life, anything moving, and then pull it up, put it in your bucket, and see all sorts of things swimming around. So we're going to switch from the worm to the frog, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite groups, amphibians, specifically anurans, which are frogs and toads. So frogs and toads have some differences. Morphologically, frogs usually have longer legs, slender bodies, smoother skin, and this allows them to do those big leaps that you see them do from the bank into the pond. Whereas toads, they have short legs, kind of wider bodies, a little round, and they do short little hops. Frogs also have teeth. They don't use them to chew or anything. They're to help grab their prey. where toads do not. Toads typically swallow their prey whole. In frogs, they lay their eggs in a cluster, like a big round cluster, and toads will do strands a lot of time, but like certain species can lay up to 1,000 eggs at once, which is really interesting. So amphibians are incredibly, incredibly important. Here's one I saw in a survey, super cute. Incredibly important to the ecosystem. They're a crucial part of the food web, both as predator and prey. They're eaten by alligators, birds, other frogs, snakes, fish, among other things. And they eat a lot of insects. They provide us with a free pest control. They eat a lot of flies and a lot of those creatures that I was just talking about. And they're also really great indicators of ecosystem health. When an environment starts to become compromised, amphibians are often the first taxa to see effects. And this is because of their incredibly permeable skin, which means any sort of contaminants from the environment they absorb directly. So this map shows diversity of amphibians across the country. Blue is showing less species, red is showing more. So here in the southeastern United States, we are in a hotspot for amphibians. And in speaking about frogs and toads specifically, North Carolina has 31 different species. Wilmington area, we have about 12. And Bald Head Island, we have 6, which 6 doesn't sound like many compared to 31, but this is a group of animals that requires clean, fresh water in order to survive. And barrier islands are influenced by salt from all ends, so it's really incredible to have a barrier island that has a healthy population of 6 different species of frogs. So frogs and toads, amphibians in general, are the most threatened group of vertebrates on the planet by a long shot. Over 40% of species are at least threatened, if not endangered, critically endangered. And this is because, like I was saying, they are so susceptible to any sort of environmental contamination. So a huge reason is because of habitat loss and development of our wetlands, filling them, draining them. And a local example of this is our cute little Carolina gopher frog. This map is their range in North Carolina, so they have a pretty limited range in North Carolina. They're found in some other southern states, but they're endangered in North Carolina. And they went from 23 known populations to only 7 currently. There's a lot of head starting programs to, raise the tadpoles into froglets and release them, but they lost a lot of habitat, and we know our region of North Carolina is a really fast-growing region, and there's a lot of development of wetland habitat, so these little guys suffered some of the consequences from that. And like I said, pollution and contamination, this is kind of showing a life cycle, so throughout it they remain in the water, and this also contributes to disease. There's a fungus that is found throughout the world. It's mainly found in South and Central America and Australia, but it's been in the United States. It's been detected in North Carolina. There's no cure, it's fatal. It's waterborne, so it finds the frog as a host and it gives them all sorts of problems, and it's resulted in decline of over 400 species globally. And if you read or listen to any reports from some frog researchers that do a lot of work in the rainforest, they have some really interesting stories about the declines they've been seeing in these frogs. And in North Carolina, I know some researchers are concerned about our eastern hellbenders, the large salamanders in the mountains. So this is just kind of something to keep in mind is also affecting them. So the most important thing when dealing with these sort of global population declines is to understand what is happening. And this is done through long-term monitoring data sets. These data sets, having the history of species abundance, diversity, and distribution, allows people to understand who's affected, where, and how can measures be taken to protect different species. For frogs and toads, this is done through auditory index surveys. So it's really hard to just go out and visually survey frogs because they might be in the water, they might be in the trees. So in order to do surveys of frogs, you learn their calls, go out after dark, and use an index. So an index would be 1 to 3. 1 would indicate there's one individual. 2 would be you can distinguish a couple, but there's some overlapping calls. And 3 would be it's a full chorus. So this is a huge collaborative effort throughout the country. This North American Amphibian Monitoring Program through USGS was started to get regional, national collaborative data. And in North Carolina, our North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission started the CASP survey, which is the Calling Amphibians Survey Program. They created 139 different survey routes in the state, and Bald Head Island is one of those. So I've been doing these surveys for the past couple of years. These are nighttime surveys, and at the Bald Head Island Conservancy, they started in 2005, and they did them until about 2011, 2012, and then they were restarted again in 2021. So this is the same map of sites that's been used since 2005, which is really interesting because I remember when I first started these, I was looking at these 2 sites here. So you can see most of the sites are next to a pond, or these 2 are near those swale areas. But these 2 I ended up going to, and I was like, these are really strange sites. These are just in the middle of a neighborhood. There's no pond, there's no water. I looked back at the data from 2005, 2006. They said there were some ponds there, and they were finding tree frogs, all sorts of frogs, or hearing them, not finding them. But now these are just neighborhoods, and on my survey right now, I usually don't hear anything at those sites. So it's interesting to see just in 20 years how much the habitat can change. But some factors on these surveys is breeding season. Different frogs have different breeding seasons, so you have to do surveys in kind of winter, late winter, early spring, spring and summer to account for all, to make sure you are around when all of the different species could be calling. And then also just taking into account temperature, when the last rainfall was, and if there's any wind or other noise that could disrupt it. So I am gonna play some frog calls for you. So a couple really common tree frogs we have around is the green tree frog and the squirrel tree frogs. This again is at one of those aquifers. You take off the cap and you have a handful of squirrel tree frogs. They look pretty similar, but green tree frogs have a distinct white mark, and they are a little larger as adults. Squirrel tree frogs can be green, brown, grayish, a variety of colors. And I think they sound similar, but I think the green tree frog sounds more like a honk, and the squirrel tree frog sounds more like a nasally quack. But you'll be able to see for yourself. This is the green. Oh, let me connect it to this. Sorry. Okay, it's connected. Ready for the green? Yeah, so it sounds like a duck. And now compare that to the squirrel tree frog. Similar, but a little more nasally. Yeah. So those are some common tree frogs. So then next we have true frogs. So we have bullfrogs and southern leopard frogs. When they're juveniles, they can look a bit similar, but southern leopard frogs have this ridge that goes all the way down, and bullfrogs have one that cuts in. So that's a way to distinguish them. Bullfrogs have a very distinct call. It's been described as a lightsaber swishing through the air. The southern leopard frog has a really interesting call. It has 3 parts to it, actually. Some say rubbing 2 balloons together, and there's a little chatter, chuckle kind of part to it. Has anyone heard this one? Yeah. Next, we have our true toads. A really common one is the southern toad. Toads like southern toad, oak toad, American toad, they have really similar calls, super high-pitched trills that in the distance would be easy to mistake for maybe even like crickets or some sort of insect because they hold the trill for a really long time too. There's also a tree frog in the background. So from far away, especially in a full chorus, they can hold that trill for so long. It's easy to blend into the background. And then another really interesting one, this is a different family of toads, narrowmouth toads. We have the eastern narrowmouth. Looks a little bit like a frog and a toad, but their call is super fun. They're really small. They're only 1.5 inches, but they are so loud. And I think they sound like a sheep or a goat. So now you know who to be on the listen for when you're walking around. These are some really common ones, but again, this was 6, and in the Wilmington area there's about 12. So you can, there's a lot of resources online if you're really interested and want to learn the different calls in your area. So now we're going to go up another level on the food web to the apex predator. We have the American alligator. So alligators are a really prominent success story from the Endangered Species Act. Up until the 50s, maybe early 60s, they were really pushed to the brink of extinction. They were hunted for their skin, for leather, for food, and there weren't really regulations. So at that time, they were not as predominant as they were today, and they were one of the first species put on the Endangered Species Act and had a remarkable recovery. I mean, they're so common in so many states now, and their population is really doing great. In North Carolina, they are still listed as threatened, and that's due to their limited range in the state, and that we're kind of at the northern end of their range. But they are found throughout 10 states, and most of them are in like Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, but we have a lot here in North Carolina too. And they can live up to 50 years, more in captivity, of course. When females lay eggs, they can have about 24 babies. Usually only about 10 survive that first year, just because bigger alligators will eat them, and there's a bit of fighting sometimes. And they have temperature-dependent sex determination, similar to a lot of other reptiles. If you've heard this about sea turtles, theirs is kind of the opposite. So cool temperatures in alligators usually produces more females, and warmer temperatures produces more males. So alligators are one of those animals, maybe similar to snakes, spiders, bats, that people don't often have, a lot of people don't have like a natural tendency to care for them as much. Maybe they instill some fear. I think they're really misunderstood, and they're incredibly important for the ecosystem around them. They're keystone species, meaning that they shape and maintain health and balance in the entire ecosystem. This is through their role as an apex predator, controlling species on lower trophic levels, as well as they're considered ecosystem engineers. This is a lot in part due to their sheer size. When they move into a place, they take over, they really move in, they make burrows, they make trails, and this kind of changes the ecosystem. It can change the hydrology a bit, the way the water flows. So when they move into a location, they really make themselves comfortable, and it can become very obvious they live there. They also have there have been some studies and research about alligators and their links to environmental health and ecotoxicology. So at the Bald Head Island Conservancy, we've collaborated with Dr. Scott Belcher at North Carolina State University. He's an ecotoxicologist who studies a lot of impacts of PFAS in the Cape Fear watershed. And he came out to Bald Head and he sampled some of our alligators. This is a picture I took during the sampling. So he takes their blood. He also has done this at Greenfield Lake, a few other locations throughout Wilmington, as well as Lake Waccamaw. And some of the alligators at Bald Head, some of the highest concentrations in their blood in the Cape Fear region. So this led to a lot of further research and further studies, but there's a lot of further questions that this leads to about the health of the alligators as well as the ecosystem as a whole. So on Bald Head Island, the work that I do with alligators is population surveys, and this is through nighttime spotlight surveys. So I've been doing this for 4 summers where I go out at night with my team. One of my interns is here, and we do surveys. We go to all the ponds, we spotlight them, and we look for an orange eye shine. And the reason we do this at night is because if an alligator is even a little bit above the surface during the day, sometimes nothing's going to reflect, but at night one could be all the way in the back and you will see that eye shine, and then you can get your binoculars out and see them. So there is a correlation between the length from the eyes to the snout in inches to the proportion of the whole alligator in feet, and this is a proven ratio. So a lot of times when their head's only above, we can use the binoculars and see kind of how big that gap is, and then we can put them in these size classes. We have 0 to 3 feet, those are the juveniles. 4 to 6 feet, those are the subadults. And then above 7 feet is adults. And we have a category for 11 plus, just so we know how many really big ones we have out there as well. So here's some examples of what we might see. This is more common than not. We see an eye shine, and then we have to get with the binoculars and see what size it is. Sometimes they're right there, so we don't really need to. This would be an adult. This would be in the 7 to 10 foot category. And then here we have a juvenile. This would be, of course, in the 0 to 3 foot category. And we do have one pond where we have 20 or more of these little guys, as well as the mom in the pond who's been there all summer. So some results from this surveys. So we have the number of alligators here. We have the years here, the past 18 years. And then we have 3 lines, juveniles, subadults, and adults. So overall, the population is increasing, but when you break it down, it really is the juveniles, those 0 to 3 foot little gators, that have had a significant increase. And I do attribute this to the gator who we named fittingly Mama. She's been satellite tagged before as a part of those ecotoxicology studies, so she has been given a name. Every year for the past 5 years, she's had at least 15 to 20 babies. And she keeps a lot of those babies, the 2nd-year babies, are still in the pond when we come back to survey the next year. So she's just been a really successful, productive mother. And this rise kind of starts when she started nesting, if we look at locations, because she always goes in the pond number 15. So when babies started showing up in pond number 15, assuming those are hers, is kind of when we saw this spike. But overall, the adults and subadults have been pretty steady. Alligators are kind of great at fighting, like I said, and in that way almost can control their own population a bit. We only have 10 to 15 larger adults, and all the rest are babies, probably about 35 or so total alligators. So again, we survey these alligators to understand the population numbers and the trends and their habitat use on the island. Again, a big portion of the island is these freshwater ponds. And Bald Head Island is a popular vacation destination, so this can provide us with a lot of great education opportunities for people who may not live somewhere with alligators, to help them understand that these animals are really important for the ecosystem. They're not, you don't have to be afraid if you respect them and listen to the rules. Also, as environmental health indicators, we had an alligator that died a couple years ago, and we sent it for a necropsy. It came back with its stomach was full of lead fishing weights, and its lead poisoning was the cause of death. The numbers was well above the lethal limit. So this also leads to some management recommendations and some more education opportunities to, really emphasize this is why you don't fish in these areas where alligators are living, and sort of providing, recommendations, because what you put into the water is impacting these animals that live there. And I wanted to include this picture too, because serving the alligators, because they do end up on the beach a lot, in the waters, in the creeks, so we understand how do they utilize this space on the island. So overall, a few messages I want you to take home is that on a barrier island, environment surrounded by salt water, that it is important to remember those freshwater ecosystems too. Those are extremely valuable for the entire island, for the wildlife, for the health of the forest, and for the humans who live there. Having a reliable groundwater source really can help all life on the island. It's also important to remember that freshwater wildlife can be bioindicators of overall ecosystem health. So if you're sitting on your porch or going for a walk and thinking, I'm not really hearing as many frogs, or where are all the lightning bugs, or what's this weird injury on this alligator that's not healing super well, that can have a greater meaning for the whole ecosystem. And it's important to pay attention to the health of the animals and the wildlife that lives there and think about the greater impact. And lastly, preserving and protecting wetlands benefits everybody. So I wanted to include a few more pictures from animals I've encountered on Bald Head. We have several freshwater turtles, banded water snakes. We have hundreds of wading birds that roost over freshwater ponds every night. So yeah, thank you. Do you have any questions?